Welcome to the Dynasty Evaluation Show. We were just here last night. We're here again today, and we'll be here again later today with another show. But today we're just having a nice, easy talk about the Combine. Me and JT met each other at the Combine. Had a great time at the Combine, and my Mighty McGlynn Dynasty Home Leagues had a couple drafts, mock drafts, one before the NFL Combine, and then 3 weeks later after the NFL Combine. We're going to kind of compare and contrast like where people went and who fell and who rose and all that kind of stuff. So join us today for the show, and we will get started. JT, it was just probably about 8 hours ago. We were drinking beer, talking about stuff last night. So it was got a couple
back at it.
Yeah, 11 beers later, and I got a good night's sleep, and here we go again. Let's start podcasting. So
that's right.
I first of all would like to say our regular chime-in listener, Chris Joel Smith, with a woo. Much appreciated woos. Always happy to see you on here, Chris. A lot of buzz in one of my home leagues this morning because I sent out some trade questions and everybody started saying, I want to move up. And then people are cutting everybody. And now's a good time to put like your trade block people on your, when that kind of stuff happens, it's good to get guys in a trade block or, put your players out there you want to get rid of or you want to trade for, start sending trades. Everybody's eyes are on the prize now. But I drove with Nick Hoover. Dustin Ludke had talked to us about, he got a couple extra tickets for this Combine, which I'd never been to before. You've been there before. We got some press passes, courtesy of Fantasy and Friends was the company we represented. Dustin called and said, "Hey, you gotta fill this out." Blah blah blah. So to me, it was like my first experience driving to Indianapolis. About 2 hour, 50-minute drive with Hoove. I paid for his gas. He used his car's mechanism to get us there, and thank God he upgraded his car because last year he had like a Geo Metro, and I barely even fit in that thing. I felt like a moose in a bird cage in a car. And then this year he had a Ford Escape, so it was a little bit better to actually drive around in, be the passenger in, and it really wasn't that big of a difference in gas. So got a cheap hotel, 10 miles or 5 miles away from the stadium itself, and then we went to the Indiana Convention Center, and got our credentials, came in, met everybody. It was just I was in awe the whole time. So what was your experience like at the Combine, JT, this last year compared to this year?
Yeah, it was fun. I've gone multiple years in a row. This is the first year I've had press passes to kind of get to do some of that stuff. Obviously, my background in sports journalism, I've been in a lot of these situations as far as interviewing guys and being around that kind of thing. But it was fun. It was fun just to kind of see everything. I tell you what, things have just changed so much in journalism over the last 20 years. It's just wild. Like, we used to have a huge camera, gigantic camera, and boom, mic, somebody shooting the camera, somebody holding the mic, asking questions and all that. Now with everybody's cell phone and everything, everybody can just get up there, hold their cell phone up, ask questions, record them, post them easily to the internet. It's just really cool to see kind of how everything has grown and changed and how big this Combine has gotten. I mean, I remember talking to some of the old heads and they're like, dude, nobody came to this. Like no one. My sister, when Michael Vick was the number one pick, my sister was actually in college and she went to school for athletic training. And she actually interned and went to the Combine and actually met Michael Vick and got an autograph for me. And she had met him and all that and was going there just helping out one of the doctors who were doing all the tests on the players and everything. And there wasn't a ton of media back then. It really wasn't. And now it's just become this huge thing. Great spectacle, even for fans. Little problem this weekend is it was nice in Indy, but it was windy. And so the fan experience outside, they had to actually bring inside because everything was blowing over. But the fan experience is a really cool thing. A lot of people take their kids on Saturday to that. I usually take my kids. Didn't this year, but just because I was going out of town again to another place. But in the past, we've taken them and they love it. You get to do the bench press. You get to do 40-yard dash. You get to see what your vertical jump is. There's all kinds of picture opportunities with helmets and jerseys and stuff like that. So it's really become a pretty cool event. for people, for kids, for media members. So it's a really nice chance to meet players, outside of the helmet. If you're not someone that covers the team all the time, which a lot of the people that cover the NFL obviously aren't covering college as well, because it's a lot of work. But it's cool. It's a cool event. I really enjoyed it this year. It was fun. Looking forward to going back next year again.
I did. Some of the pros and cons I had, yes, obviously the weather has something to do with it. That's a factor that the NFL cannot control. I guess maybe they had a little bit later in the season, maybe, but it just probably fit the convention center and the stadium's probably timeline this year, and it is what it is. Can't control the wind. If it was a nice day, 10 degrees warmer, it would have been a perfect day to be outside with a jacket on, taking all the pictures, doing all the NFL stuff. But I didn't like going to the combine itself and seeing that they had one section off for all the fans. Like one quarter of the stadium was all the fans, and half the stadium was empty. And they had the first section, the second section, and the third row way up on top was jam packed like sardines in the stadium. Like open up like 2 or 3 more sections. I didn't understand what that was all.
Yeah, they do that every year because they have very limited staff and very limited like food and drink options, and they're trying to kind of keep everybody in one area. So I think that's why they do that, because they don't want people walking all around the whole stadium. They're trying to keep people going in one entrance, out one entrance, those types of things. So it is kind of interesting. I think there's one. I always wanted to sit in one area, but they have it blocked off completely. I think it's because that's where everybody's running the 40 straight at them, and they don't want anyone in the crowd taking pictures or doing something that's going to distract them, is my guess. And that's me just making that up. I don't know if that's for sure, but that would be my guess, is they don't want anybody distracting the guys. They're right there, so they don't have to sit right in front. But like I said, it's a nice event. People come. It's not like a game. We don't have 60,000 people at the combine. It's a much smaller event. So they do, like, if you've ever been to Lucas Oil, they only open up like a little corner of the stadium for the most part, and everything's kind of there. So that's the difference on that one. And they're pretty much locked into the beginning of March is pretty much when they have to do this, because they've got to have enough time to get everybody in, get the evals, do everything to get set up for the draft, which is now, we're now sitting a month and a week away, about 6 weeks away from the draft. So this is kind of the timeline they have to do the combine now. And I think they've really done a nice job with the Senior Bowl and the Shrine Bowl and all those ones, and getting those first is kind of like the precursors to the combine, and then doing the combine. I think it's kind of the NFL's really done a nice job of kind of putting that all together. So you're getting a good chance to see a lot of these players multiple times before the actual NFL draft. I think the league probably likes it as well. And again, we still have pro days. So we're going to see over the next month, we're going to see a ton of pro days for these guys and get even more numbers. So some of the guys that didn't throw or didn't run a 40 or didn't do a specific event will likely do them at their pro day. So we're going to get some more info kind of keep coming out here.
Jimmy Prorog, can JT run a sub 4-minute 40-yard dash? Man, I'll tell you what. Back in the day,
a sub 4 minute. I can definitely do sub 4 minutes. So my fastest ever when I was in high school, my fastest ever timed, I ran a 4.7. 4.740. So I was fairly quick, but not super fast. I was probably like near one of the higher end guys on my team. I kind of played I played running back / fullback / second tight end / slot receiver. I played a little bit of everything. I kind of was one of those in between guys that could do a little bit of everything. And I was 5'10", 170, but I played like I thought I was 6'2", 235. So I just tried to run everybody over and try to bully people. I tried to play like I was huge, but I wasn't.
I had my coaches there with stopwatches, like timing our 40s and stuff like that. I always thought I was pretty fast. I raced kids in the neighborhood. I was able to, keep up with the running backs and receivers, even though I was an offensive lineman, because I was a small offensive lineman. 5'11", 235 is not a big offensive lineman, even though I was in the Chicago Catholic League and I had some pretty damn good competition, but I was very undersized for an offensive lineman, and to play left tackle, that was kind of crazy. But we ran an I formation. We just ground and pounded everybody. It's all you had to do was just get low and get and wall people off. It's we ran the ball like 800 times a game, and that's pretty much all we did. We hardly ever passed, and we implemented a fullback on almost that. Rob Haney, our fullback, on almost every play. with Joe Schuster running the ball. He came pretty close to breaking the state record, the Illinois state record that year, 1992, with our Brother Rice Crusaders. But that's all we had to do was ground and pound. We had some good competition, and that's it. So I was more of an athlete.
We ran option. Originally, we ran an I, and we ended up changing it to a pro set option style where we would call plays at the line. But we actually did open it up like my sophomore, junior, senior year. We actually had some good quarterbacks, and we actually started running like trips and 4 wide and stuff that like we had never done in the history of our school. So we actually opened it up. We had a couple guys that made all state at wide receiver and quarterback. So we actually mixed it up quite a bit when I got to school. But originally, when growing up as a kid, we literally ran the I formation, and it was veer and fullback dive and option and power and ISO, and that's all we ran. But we mixed it up as we got older. So
yeah, 32 blast, 32 counter, 22 this, hit across the board. Willpower, what's up, guys? Thanks for checking in.
21 trap. The trap. We used to love that trap. The fullback trap was great. If you got the ball in the fullback trap and you got that nice trap block, oh man, the hole would just be right there. You could go.
I tell you what, for running as much as we did, we never really had like superpower plays where we pulled the tackle and the guard. Most of it was just guard pulling. I think superpower is more of a double wing offense than it is more than just I formation. So I never had the chance to like really. There's a couple plays that I pull once in a while, but I mean. Nowadays, the tackles and the guards are all over the place, man. It's a whole different. I wish I would have been like kind of in this, but our biggest thing was having a tight end that just double teamed the defensive end every play. When he'd go low, I'd push the defensive end over him, or I'd go low, depending on where the guy, and he'd push the defensive end over me. It was just like it was like comedy. It was like Laurel and Jekyll and Hyde, or Laurel and Hardy, like just like back and forth tripping defensive ends. It was so fun back in the day. Like
that's it was funny because the offensive lineman they called me an honorary offensive lineman because I blocked so much for a running back because we would run double tight end sometimes and we didn't really have a second tight end. So I would slide up and play the second tight end on the line when we went too tight. It was pretty funny. And so I did a lot of blocking, but I get a lot of screen passes. And then when we went trips, I would play in the trips too. So it was fun. I got to do a lot of different things. So
you're like an old school H-back.
Good times.
Yes, good times. So anyway, before we were talking about that, we were talking about the combine actually, and actual real NFL athletes.
Yeah. People that actually can move and faster and are big and strong.
Yeah, big.
I was laughing. I think the only person at the combine that I'm bigger than was Tez Johnson. So that's it. So he's the only guy I was bigger than is Tez Johnson. So
yeah, I'm taking pictures of some of the receivers that are bigger than me. I'm like, what the shit, man? This is crazy, unbelievable. But the combine experience itself was just going to the convention center. Convention center was set up nice, check in, get your badges, and then they had a bunch of rooms set off for, different levels of people. The NFL had some rooms. The press had one big room, like a humongous, like gymnasium type room with, everybody had tables, and then they had the podiums, which you walk up and ask questions to. It was just like seeing the movies. Like if you've never been to an event like this before, there's 70 people all shouting at the same time, blah, 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 blah. You're trying to you can ask, and these guys have like 5 or 7 minutes also. So you don't have much time to get a question in. And you if you're lucky enough to get a question in, sometimes it's 30 seconds or 45 seconds or a minute answer for these guys. And they've only answered like 5 or 6 questions and then their time's up and they got to go. And it's like, I missed out. But it's nice talking to the offensive linemen. I didn't really get a chance to talk to many receivers or running backs because everybody was there for the running backs and receivers days. A little bit easier to talk to the offensive linemen, but yeah, it was kind of at least I got my feet wet now. I know what to do, where to be, how to get there, maybe in the front row, and just keep talking about my question so they look at me when instead of other people. I stopped my question too early. I didn't want to be rude, but man, there's no manners in those kind of situations.
You just kind of fight through, man. Whenever it's a bullpen atmosphere like that, where everybody's in there together, and you don't have, in certain situations, if you're covering NFL or you're covering college, you have someone who's basically moderating, and they're calling on people to ask their question. Whenever you're in a bullpen situation like that, where there's no one moderating, you're just calling out questions. You just gotta bully your way in there and get them out.
Yeah. So that was my learning experience for that one. It was cool, but other than that, it was nice taking pictures with the I'm sure you took 1,000 pictures with the Colts Super Bowl trophy because it's got to be nice to see. The Bears have one from a long time ago, but I was able to see that Super Bowl. They don't have their trophy like in the stadium that I know of that I've seen so far, but other than that, the city of Indianapolis has a lot of good restaurants, a lot of good bars, a lot of good places to go. The hotels were actually, pretty damn cheap. I got a Motel 6, which I could sleep on a bed of nails in the middle of a rainstorm outside. It doesn't really bother me at all. I don't care. But the Motel 6 was like $67 with tax.
Indy is a really, really affordable city.
Yeah.
And I think they came out, somebody had posted something on Twitter. Oh, I don't know, it was last season. They were talking about ticket prices, and the Colts were like the third cheapest ticket average in the league. Indy's just a really reasonable town as far as like going to prices of hotels, prices of restaurants. Obviously, they've got some really high-end, nice stuff. If that's what you're looking for, you can actually do that. But there's a good mix of places and areas and stuff. And Indy's really grown since the Super Bowl was there. They've really done a ton to the city, built up a lot of blocks and streets that really kind of were dead. And they've done a nice job of adding a lot of stuff in. So I know I say this because I'm a little bit biased because I'm a Colts season ticket holder, but I just love going to Colts games. So easy to get in and out of the games, so easy to park, so easy to easily get to a bar or a restaurant before or after the game. Within walking distance. It's a nice fan experience. If you've never gone, if you're someone from out of state and your team plays the Colts, I suggest going to a away game in Indy. They always get a really big crowd of fans from the other opposing team because it just is a nice place to trip. It's easy to get to the airport. The airport's not too far from the actual stadium in downtown. It's a nice trip. It's an easy trip. So get a couple of friends together, family together, and head out and come to Indy for a game this year. And right now, while the Colts haven't been good, haven't been very good, the tickets are cheaper. So that's nice.
Jamie Perrog says, I went to a Colts game the year before they drafted Andrew Luck. Indy fans are so friendly. They really are.
They pretty are. I mean, as long as you don't jab them with much, they're pretty chill people for the most part. Really. I mean, I had a buddy who's a Patriots fan, and we've had some different experiences because the Colts fans really dislike the Patriots because of all the years with Manning and Brady. But for the most part, if you're chill, most Colts fans are totally chill. And of course, Jamie, I feel bad for you if you went to a game the year before they got Luck. That was their terrible season. The only thing that saved me being an Indy Colts fan that year was hoping that they would get Andrew Luck and betting against the Colts every week. So just betting against them because they were terrible that year. It was brutal. I still tell the story of the final game of the year with Chris Painter, last drive of the season. Takes them 80 yards down the field and almost scores a game-winning touchdown to blow the number one pick, and they wouldn't have got Andrew Luck. And luckily, on 4th down and goal from the 8, he throws an incompletion in the back of the end zone, and you would have thought I was cheering on a Super Bowl victory. I was going ballistic in the stands. Everybody was mad at me. Everybody's like, why are you cheering? We just lost. I was like, we just got Andrew Luck, people. We just got Andrew Luck. I was going ballistic. It was funny. That was one of the times the Colts fans were not happy with me at that moment because a lot of them still thought we were going to keep Peyton Manning after the injury, but I was like, nope, we're moving on here, guys. And so I think those people probably that were mad at me understood later on why I was cheering.
If Andrew Luck was to play his entire career without being hurt and without all that kind of stuff, who do you think would have had a better career, Andrew Luck or Peyton Manning in the long run?
It's tough you can't really discard what Peyton did. I mean, they were just unreal. Sure. And the thing is, people got to realize, even in those really good years with Peyton, he was carrying that team a lot of the time. Yeah. Like, I mean, those teams weren't necessarily great that were going 13-3 and 12-4. He was literally carrying those records. I mean, a lot of those Indy teams were probably 500 teams if it wasn't Peyton Manning at quarterback. So I think people got to realize that. Now, there not to discount a lot of the good players that are on the team because they did have a ton of good players there as well, but he really did carry him. You saw him as soon as he got hurt, they were the worst team in the league.
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, that's how big of an impact he made. Same thing with Andrew Luck. Andrew Luck, I tell you what, he's one of those guys, people are bitter about the way it ended. With him retiring kind of last second out of nowhere with all the injuries piling up. But I tell you what, if people really go back and evaluate his career and what he did there, I mean, this dude took the worst team in the league and led him to the playoffs the very next year. I mean, and it was a lot of Andrew Luck. It wasn't like they added a ton of good players. It was like Andrew Luck all of a sudden was carrying them to victory. And honestly, he did a lot of the same things Peyton Manning did. He just willed the team to win games. They were never great when Luck was there, and whenever they were good, it was because Luck was just playing out of his mind. I just think he gets a bad rap because of the way things ended. If people really didn't look at that, some of the numbers he put up were insane. And again, it's not like he had great players to go to all the time either in that. I mean, he was getting some of the stud wide receivers at the end of their career. Obviously, he had a good T.Y. Hilton, who was much better than people thought he was going to be when he was drafted. Really good. I think Manning definitely has a better career than Luck. He also was on, I think, better teams than Luck, but I think Luck is right there behind him. I just think he goes down as one of the more underrated careers. I saw people asking about, like, oh, is he a Hall of Famer? I'm like, in my mind, he is.
Yeah.
The tough part is he didn't play as long and didn't have as much success because he just got the crap kicked out of him in Indy. But that guy was so good. People just don't realize how good he was that didn't see him play on a regular basis.
Who was the third wide receiver to get 1,000 yards that one year? Harrison, Reggie Wayne. Was it the tight end?
Well, Dallas Clark had a couple huge years. But Brandon Stokely had a year that came out of nowhere. Jamie, tell me if I'm wrong on that. Brandon Stokely had a monster year somewhere when he was their third wide receiver. I don't know if he ever made it to 1,000 yards. That's a stat I should probably look up. But again, that's what I'm saying. Like, guys like Manning were making guys like him relevant in fantasy. It was, wild. Ty coming from Florida International. I think he was a third or fourth round pick. I'm going to need to look that one up too. But man, he ended up like having an unreal career. Him and Andrew Luck were something special together.
Yeah, he says, it was Stokely where all three wide receivers had 1,000 yards. See, I remember having Stokely.
I mean, that tells you how great you are as a QB when you make, and not to rip on Brandon Stokely. He was a solid player, but when Brandon Stokely is your third wideout getting 1,000 yards, that's freaking insane.
I saw this question. I can't wait for this one. Yes.
Didn't mean to turn this into an old Colts podcast, but here we go.
Here we go. This is right up JT's alley here. Aiden Weingartner. So sorry if this was already asked because I just got here, but what's your thoughts on Anthony Richardson? So my thoughts on Anthony Richardson, if some way on accident he ended up in my roster, I'm trading to guys like JT. We're going to overpay for him because they think he's going to be the best thing that ever happened since sliced bread. So I am not a big fan at all. I am not a fan of quarterbacks who run and get you a ton of fantasy points for 2 or 3 seasons and then kind of don't have anything to, it's, I guess, dynasty leagues, you're kind of, you're looking in 2 or 3 year windows anyway. So I probably should change my attitude on quarterbacks like that who score a lot of fantasy points, but I don't see a long-term value in. But, JT's a Colts fan. He's got this, he wears blue glasses everywhere he goes because everything that's blue and white is so much better than the rest of the world. I am not an Anthony Richardson fan. JT loves the dude. He thinks he's going to be the future. He'll be in the Hall of Fame right next to Peyton or Andrew Luck one day. So, we'll see what happens there. But no, he's gone.
So, yeah, for me, if you're out and you just don't like Anthony Richardson, you probably need to sell him now. Like you said, John, someone like me who still has hope, I still like Anthony Richardson. Here's the thing for me. When they drafted Anthony Richardson, I was in no way, shape, or form expecting Anthony Richardson to come out and just be awesome. Right. He was a clear 3-year project minimum. I mean, coming out of college, he barely played at Florida, barely played in high school. It's just, I mean, the guy has not had a ton of games. He's got to get game reps, and that's why it was so disappointing to see him get hurt as a rookie and then turn around this year and then just yank him and put him in and pull him out. The guy needs reps. He's got to play. And I understand, Ballard and some of these guys are worried about getting fired. That's what we live in. People just don't have time to wait on these guys anymore.
Right.
So they do get pulled. I mean, we saw it all over the league. Bryce Young was another good example. There was no reason for Bryce Young to be getting benched for Andy Dalton, but he came back. He played pretty well. And here's the thing is, if you're looking for a positive in what Anthony Richardson did, obviously the glaring passing completion percentage is, under 50% is just not what you can do these days when everybody's throwing 65 to 70% completion. He can't be at 47%. But people forget, dude, this guy chucked the ball deep on a ton of percentage of his passes. I mean, he was not throwing little dump offs. He was going for home run plays. Now, does he need to turn that down a notch a little bit? Probably at times. And the other issue is he's not great at hitting those little dump off, give me passes. That's kind of been, that was the knock on him early on, was like, hey, he's got a monster arm. He can make the throws, but like he can make the super difficult throws. The guy's unbelievable athletic, but can he make the simple stuff, the easy plays? So far, that's been questionable. Now, he did not. They played some bad teams down the stretch, so I will give that caveat that they played some bad teams, but he led him on 2 game-winning drives in 2 of the last 3 games of the year. 2 game-winning drives where he marched them right down the field for wins. So if you're looking for some positives with Anthony Richardson, I think there are some. The issue is I felt a lot more confident about him going into last season than I am this year. And the reason is not Anthony Richardson. The reason is I'm very nervous about the Colts coaching staff and Chris Ballard, the GM. I did this when they pulled him last year and said it was like for the good of him and everything else. To me, now I'm losing confidence in the Colts, the organization. That's my problem.
Yeah.
I think Anthony Richardson has a chance to be good. Now, could he be a colossal flop? Absolutely, but we know that with every quarterback that's drafted, that there's a high percentage chance that they're not going to make it because it's just the numbers, bear that out. That those guys, a lot of guys just don't hit. But you got to play the guy and give him a shot. I still think he can be good. I still think they're trying to figure out how to best set up the offense for him. Because again, if you watch him play in a game, the stats are much worse than he actually is. Like when you actually watch him, he's making plays. He's putting the ball where he needs to be. There's a ton of guys that were dropping passes last year. There was a ton of plays where he was just barely missing. Some guy missed the ball or got tackled on the one, or his stats would have been extremely better. So I hope they get a concise plan. I know they're talking about open competition. I think that's BS. I think Anthony Richardson's starting this year for the Colts. So I believe it. If I can get him at a discount in fantasy, I'm trading for him. You're probably not going to get that first that you would have last year, but I had the discussion the other day was like, do you trade like an early second for him? I would. Personally, if I think I still believe in a shot with him, I would trade an early second. I trade a top 5 pick this year, depending on my team. I probably wouldn't, but if I could get him for somewhere like some kind of second round pick or a combo of player and pick swaps, I'm interested in that.
Would you take Jackson Dart over Anthony Richardson?
Oh. Right now, as it sits, until we see where Dart gets drafted, I'm AR over Dart. If Dart gets into the first round, I think we maybe have a different conversation. If he does a Bo Nix and gets taken in the top 12 or 14, like I didn't think it was going to happen with Bo Nix last year. If Jackson Dart goes in the top 14, then I think you kind of have to go with the new guy, and you have to go Dart then. But if he's in the now, if Dart goes to top of the second round and goes to Tennessee or the Browns, give me AR.
Yeah, this is great. There was so many times where Richardson just overthrew a wide open AD Mitchell downfield last year. He sure did. His passing skills.
Miss him on quite a few, but I will tell you this: AD Mitchell did not do himself any favors. He ran some bad routes and he had some plays where he absolutely should have made catches that he didn't make for a huge yardage. So it was a little bit of a combo. There was a couple highlights, and I should call them lowlights instead of highlights, but there was a couple ones that were brutally bad where AR just absolutely gunned it 20 yards past him. And so there, but again, I think because Anthony Richardson is the guy he is, you're going to get some of that. And you have to expect that you're going to have times where he just unleashes one and he just puts too much on it. The guy's just got an absolute cannon of an arm. I don't know, John, if you've ever seen some of those charts that the couple guys will put up on Twitter, but they threw like the A dot of where AR's passes were.
Yeah.
And they had to like extend the chart because he had so many passes was so deep compared to everybody else's pass. He's got so much high upside. But again, we've learned in the NFL, it's not about athleticism and upside all the time. You've got to be able to make the smart plays. You've got to be able to make the dump off passes when you need the dump off passes. You can't go for a grand slam every time.
He's the Jim
sometimes
Thome.
He does that a little bit right now.
His passing is the same as Jim Thome's hitting. Like unless it's right down the middle and you get a grand slam, he's done. He just swings and misses, and it's like, okay, wow, it's not even close. That's my equivalent of Anthony Richardson. Like Shedeur Sanders right now. We're talking about how much. I'm not a Sanders fan. I just don't think he sees the field that well. As far, I mean, I know he's very accurate. He's got but his design plays are just made for him to make completions in the college level anyway. But I just Richardson is just he's looking for the home run all the time. He's you can see like Tomey just swinging for the fences out every time he gets a chance, and he can't hit the curveball. Just like Richardson can't hit the simple passes, that kind of stuff. It's just a comparison that I don't know. I'm moving on from Richardson anyway, but I appreciate the question, Aiden. It was
here's a good one, John, that we got up here. Jamie says Richardson or Penix in Dynasty.
I've never been a fan of Penix, so this is kind of a tough one. But I think knowing what I know about Richardson, I'm probably going to take Penix.
Right now, probably. He's got a good route to start. It seems like the Falcons really love him, so probably Penix is the way. Good. Aiden again here says I agree. Such a project coming out. 4th overall pick was too rich for him. I agree. I think they kind of felt like they were stuck and they had to take a guy there. I was 100% in the CJ Stroud camp, to be honest with you. I wanted them to take CJ Stroud so bad. And I just knew it wasn't going to happen because I think Houston was not going to make a trade with the Colts being in division.
Sure.
That one worried me. There was no way they're going to move up to get him. I was take Anthony Richardson or trade and move back in that situation. I was praying for anything but Will Levis, to be honest with you. When I was at this draft in Kansas City, I was like, anything but Will Levis. I just did not want Will Levis at all, especially at number 4. So I think the Colts felt a little pressure to take him. I also hearing from a lot of NEA writers and other people that are close to the team. I think Ballard and the group, once they saw Richardson at the combine, I think they felt like they couldn't take a chance that if he ended up blowing up and having a Lamar Jackson type career, that they could live with themselves passing on him. So I think that's kind of where it came down to. I think they knew that there was a ton of risk involved, but I think they thought the reward was outweighing the risk in that they just had to, if they pass on him and let somebody else go to him, it kind of like a Kobe Bryant situation, right, where a bunch of teams pass on him because they just weren't sure. He was a high school kid, and then he blows up, becomes one of the best ever, and then all those teams were just killing themselves for not taking him. I think that's where the Colts were. I think just where they're at as a franchise and with no QB in sight and doing the roundabout of let's keep signing old washed up QBs and hoping they make it. I think I felt the pressure was on and they took him. 4 I thought was too high. I understand why they did it though. So
I cannot understand how the Dynasty Evaluation podcast turns into a Colts podcast on a regular basis.
Oh, we got one more. Hold on. We got another one. Will says, I traded AR for Ridley last year and just traded Ridley 2 weeks ago for the 2-1 in this year's draft class. I don't mind that at all. I like the 2-1. I think the 2-1, I just did an article for DLF on the early second round.
Time out 1 second. He traded AR for Ridley straight up last year. This must be a 1 quarterback league, right?
That's what I'm guessing. I'm guessing because if you did that in a Superflex, I'm like, oh, that's a little iffy. But if it's 1 QB, I love it. I love it if you get that and then you turn around and you got Ridley and then now you got 2-1. I like that a ton. So, Will, I don't know if that's Superflex. Now the value is not bad because I would probably trade 2-1 for AR now. But in a roundabout way, it worked out for you. So I don't mind that at all.
I don't mind it. Yeah, you coped with your losses on that one. Yeah, for sure. All right, so The combine was awesome. All right, we'll put it that way. I'm going to go next year. We'll figure it out. Penix 100% willpower. Yes, absolutely. Penix 100%. So, we did a couple drafts. We got to kind of move on here.
Yeah, we're only 35 minutes in, John. We haven't even talked about the drafts yet. So let's get into these drafts. Let's get into these mock drafts.
So
give the people what they want.
Pull up the mock draft you have going on right now. I'm going to use my phone. I had the other one up there, but I don't know what's going on. I actually X out of it. So I'm going to use my phone, and we'll talk about some what happened in the first mock compared to the second mock draft. So these are Superflex tight end premium 12-team mock drafts. I made it 5 rounds, which you think the norm is 5 rounds, but when you're doing like this time of year, I think 2 or 3 rounds is probably the norm. But I just want to get people familiar with all the players that are out there on the board right now. So that being said, this is the latest mock draft we had, and I had number 1. I had what was this? Draft number 1, like probably about a month ago, and then post combine we did another draft. So no changes at 101, Ashton Genty. No change at 102, Ted McMillan. Number 3 was Cam Ward, and then the first change was the 104 in the early draft was Luther Burden, and this one turned into Marion Hampton. So how did Luther Burden fall, and how did Marion Hampton jump up so far? Let's just start with that, JT.
Yeah, so I was the 1-4 in this draft. I took a Marion Hampton. So this one's going to depend on team need for me, whether I'm going to go wide out running back or quarterback here at 1-4. I've got a team that needs running back bad at 1-4. So I kind of like went into this mock thinking, hey, if I was drafting on that team that needs running back and I'm at 1-4, who would I take? So I've got Hampton as he's my QB, or sorry, my running back 2 behind GT. I loved what he did at the combine, running in that 4.47 range, which was great at his size at 5'11", 220. Really good, productive player at North Carolina. 1,500 yards with Drake May. Drake May goes away. The team is terrible, and he still gets 1,600 yards. So I just think Hampton proved himself. He was one of those guys at the combine. I think he did himself a lot of favors by actually running and doing the events of the combine, because I think it proved that he, depending on where you're at with him and Henderson, I feel like they're both 2A and 2B. Like depending on where they're land, I like both of them a lot. So I went Hampton here at 1-4, but if I was a team that needed wide receiver at 1-4, I probably would have taken Luther Burden here, to be honest with you. So if I was going wide out over running back, but again, I have a team that I'm drafting the 1-4, and I am desperately needing running back, like desperately. I think my only 2 starters are CMC and Jalen Warren. So I need running back so bad. So I am probably taking Hampton in that situation. If I need QB, you know me, in QB, I would have went Sanders. And if I need a wide receiver, I probably would have went Burden. But those are kind of my 3 guys that I like behind GT, McMillan, and Ward.
So Hampton in our first draft, Marion Hampton went 106. So he moved up 2 spots post draft, and Burden was 104 in this draft. And our latest draft, he dropped to 106. So, excuse me. Is that 106 or 108, right? Is that 106? Oh, it's 108. I can't see the. Yeah, 108. I'm sorry. So Burden went 108. So he dropped 4 spots post combine draft. So in the original draft, Shedeur Sanders went 105. In our latest mock here, he went 107, right? Yeah, 17. So he dropped 2 spots. Sanders dropped 2 spots post combine. And again, these are just my home league. I invite everybody across all 8 home leagues. Everybody can jump in whenever they want to. These are not professional analysts. These are just fantasy football players that I play with. They're going to be mad when I say they're not professional analysts, because they all write and do podcasts and stuff, but whatever. It is what it is. So the next one I had 1-7 was Travis Hunter in the original draft. And Travis Hunter went all the way at 2-3 in the post-combine draft because he declared as a defensive back. So what do you think about that fall? Because you're a Travis Hunter guy.
Yeah, Travis Hunter's one, I think, until we get a little bit more consistency on what's going to happen with him, I think he's just a hard one for people to read. I know a lot of people that have him as their number one wide receiver if he's going to play mostly wide out. Now, there's a lot of teams that are nervous that he's going to play full-time cornerback and just play in slight packages on offense. So that's going to be interesting to kind of see how that is. Here's the thing I think is going to be interesting for him is depending on who drafts him, the guy's shown he can play a ton of plays. Now, obviously playing a ton of plays in college and playing a ton of plays in the pros is not exactly the same thing. If he can even play 65, 70% of the offensive plays, and he plays on a team that like runs a lot of man on defense where he doesn't need to be in the defensive film room sessions constantly because I mean, he's an elite cornerback. I mean, the guy reads the quarterback great. He has great instincts, super long arms. One of the most interesting things from the combine, I thought, was they did the wingspan of players. Travis Hunter had a bigger wingspan than Tyler Warren, who's 6'5", 250. That's crazy. 5 inches shorter, and he had longer arms. He has absolutely super long arms, which once you watch him on film and you know that, you can really tell because he comes out of nowhere and gets balls and knocks balls away and gets picks that you don't think there's any way he would get to, but his arms are so long. The same way when he has 50-50 balls on offense when he goes up, he just, even though he's 6 foot, he plays so much bigger because his wingspan. He knows how to jump and catch the ball at its high point. So Hunter's going to be a guy that's going to be all over the place. I think it's going to be all the way up to even after the draft. People are going to be really looking. I tell you what, where the value is going to change for Hunter is once he gets drafted and once they do minicamp and once we get closer to the start of the season, people that are drafting super late in the year, say like in August, when they kind of know what he's going to do, is really going to determine where Hunter goes. Because I can see Hunter being top 4 if he ends up on a team that takes him out there in mini camp and practice and has him playing a ton of wide receiver and playing some DB. Now, if you're in an IDP league, and I've said this before, if Travis Hunter even plays 50% of snaps on offense and you're an IDP league that starts a cornerback, I think you have to take Travis Hunter in the first 4.
Sure.
Because he's going to score you so many points at a cornerback spot, which typically doesn't score a lot of points. He's going to score you a ton. I lost in a college football IDP league last year in the championship game because the other guy had Travis Hunter starting on defense, and he literally outscored every defensive player on my team and his team combined. Because he had like 11 catches for like 140 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, is that going to happen in the pros? Who knows? But he's just great value. I think he's just one of those people are not sure where to take him. I've seen him go 1-4. I've seen him go middle of the second. I've seen him go into the second. It's just a tough, because you also don't want to take a guy who ends up playing 30 snaps on offense a game, you know, in the first round. So I think people are a little more nervous. I think they're a little willing to take a chance on a guy in the second.
Yeah. January draft, Quinshon Judkins went 108. March draft, Quinshon Judkins went 109, dropped 1 spot, not a big deal. January draft, Travion Henderson, 109. March draft, Travion Henderson went 105. So he moved up quite a few spots in the later draft. Good combine,
The deal for Henderson, the combine helped him because he was bigger than most people thought he would be.
Yeah.
So I think the fact that he was a solid over 200 pounds, I think people knew he was pretty fast, but they just weren't sure. And he ran that 4.43, which at his size over 200 is super solid time. So I think people were worried about, hey, he got nicked up in college. Can he be an ever down back? And I think what people saw what Jahmyr Gibbs did at his size last year, and people are now saying, oh, Henderson's bigger than Jahmyr Gibbs, like slightly bigger than him, and runs about the same 40. Like if he gets drafted by the Bears, holy crap, could he be Jahmyr Gibbs on the Bears? So I think people that were kind of iffy, weren't sure about Henderson, are now back in on Henderson.
Yeah. January draft, Tyler Warren went 110. March draft, Tyler Warren went 106. He did some good combine. He had a good combine also, and people kind of noticed it. He helped himself a lot at the combine. So
Warren's just going to be one of those guys. I think he's going to go all over the place in drafts, depending on how big your premium is and how much you need tight end.
Yeah,
I just think you're just going to see that. I think you're going to see drafts where he goes real high. If you're in a 2-point tight end premium, I think you could see him go in the top 3. I think middle of the first is probably a solid spot. And I know in other leagues, if your premium's a little lower, or, the spread out of tight ends is pretty good. Maybe he goes a little bit later if someone doesn't need him.
January draft, Ollie Gordon went 111, and this March draft, Ollie Gordon went 2.8. So that's almost an entire round drop. But I think somebody really reached on Ollie Gordon in the first round to begin with. So it probably leveled out a little bit, where Ollie Gordon's probably mid-second anyway, so it's not that big of a deal. Caleb Johnson went 112 in January. Caleb Johnson went, where's he at here?
He's at 110.
Oh yeah, I see him now. 110. Okay, so he moved himself a little bit. Caleb Johnson, he timed. We talked about this yesterday with Anthony or
Angelo
Fantasy last night. Caleb Johnson, his time wasn't what we thought, but his drills look like on the field he plays so much faster than his.
He's got a good burst. His top end speed wasn't it, but I mean. I also do, and I always say this, some of these guys play faster than their 40 time.
Yes.
And some guys have blazing 40 times and then don't play that fast on the field.
Yeah.
Because it's a good barometer, but it's not everything. So don't just totally sign up for a guy or get out on a guy on just a 40 time.
Caleb Johnson's not ability to break tackles is my biggest concern that in the NFL, but his playing speed is not. He hits the hole really fast. So
he's a guy, I think if he goes to Denver in the second round, I think will be a spot where a ton of people love him. So I think if he gets a good landing spot on a team that runs a zone blocking scheme, which is what he pretty much was in at Iowa, I think you're going to see people really love him. So,
yeah. Okay. So then in the January draft, Emeka Egbuka went 2-1. He went 112 here. So, that's pretty much same spot. 2-2 in January was Colson Loveland. And then he went 2-2 here also. So Devin Neal was 2-3. Devin Neal is 212 in the March. So he dropped almost a full round. And I like Devin Neal.
Before we're talking about, Jamie says great value on Egbuka. I agree. Egbuka going here as the fourth wideout off the board at the end of the first. If I'm at the end of the first and I get Egbuka, I'm going to be ecstatic. I've seen other drafts where people really love Egbuka. I know people taking Egbuka as their number one. So, and depending on where his landing spot is, I really think so many of these running backs and wide receivers are so close to each other. It really is going to be dependent on landing spot and who people just like better. Because guys are so close. I don't think it's so clear cut like, oh, this guy's 1, this guy's 1, this guy's 2, this guy's 3, this guy's 4, this is 5. Everybody has a real mix of those guys. You can't even at wide receiver, Tet McMillan is a lot of people's 1, and Tet has been my 1 pretty much all year. But I have to tell you, I'm starting to love the Burden dip. People are a little out on Burden. He ran a 4.41, 6 foot, a 2.05 at the combine, ran a 4.41. Freaking love it. Yak machine. People are down on him because of the production this last season at Missouri. It's a combination of him being a little banged up. He had another 1 or 2 games where he was sick. Brady Cook really struggled with injuries. It just hurt the offense. I'm buying the Burden dip, but I've seen people have Burden all the way down to 6 or 7, and I've had people see him at number 1. Same thing with Tet. I haven't seen Tet lower than 3 for most people, but he's been a 1, 2, 3. Egbuka, same thing. I've known people that have Egbuka at 1 and at 5. So that's interesting with Egbuka. Right now, I think that's going to be some really good value.
My tier 1 is Burden and Egbuka, and I think the landing spot is going to be the only thing that determines which one of them is my number 1 and number 2. So the other guys, Tet and Golden, and I think Tet's in a class by himself, probably in tier 2 for me.
It's been real interesting because we saw Tet being mocked and that's as a top 5 pick early in the process. And now he's kind of like, we've seen him more like 9 to Carolina. And then recently I've seen a couple mocks where he's all the way down to 22 for the Chargers. Now I absolutely love that fit. I'd rather see him at number 22 for the Chargers than number 9 to Carolina. Personally, I just love the Herbert connection there.
Why do you hate?
I would actually draft him higher if he went to the Chargers than if he went to the Panthers. I don't hate the landing spot for the Panthers. I just love the landing spot for the Chargers so much more.
Why do you hate Bryce Young?
I don't hate Bryce Young. I'm just not I never was a big Bryce Young guy. When everybody was like, oh, Bryce Young or CJ Stroud, I was 100% behind CJ Stroud. I thought he was by far the better quarterback and would be a better NFL quarterback. So I like Bryce Young really showed some nice upside at the end of last year. So if you have him, I literally have Bryce Young on 0 teams out of 60 leagues. So that tells you how much I really like Bryce Young, but also people were taking him earlier than I was willing to spend any money on him. As far as draft capital on him.
January draft, Jackson Dart was 204. Jackson Dart is 205 in this draft. Quinn Ewers is 205 in January. He's 205 in March. Harold Fannon's 206 in January. Harold Fannon is 308. So I think the combine kind of, even though he didn't, he did his drills really well, but his 40 wasn't up to par. And then I think people got a little bit more, they moved up the.
He's also one of the smaller tight ends. So he was like I think he was the second lightest tight end behind Gunnar Helm.
It doesn't scare me anymore because these tight ends can move, right? It doesn't scare me.
If you're drafting Fannin to block, you're doing it wrong anyway. I mean, that's not his game. You need him to move him around. You need him to be doing this. Fannin, I think, is going to be a guy that's going to be real interesting. Just because you're going to see people who really like him and people are down on him. Like for a while, people had him as tight end, 1 or 2. And you see in this mock, he was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He was the 5th tight end off the board.
Right.
So I think you're going to see some differences there. I did want to get back real quick. You brought up Devin Neal. Mm-hmm. So Devin Neal, to me, is this year's Bucky Irving. I just think he's a guy that I liked in college a ton. I loved the film. I like his receiving profile. I think he's a better player on the field than his combine stats look like. Mm-hmm. I way overreacted to Bucky's terrible combine and the fact that he was small and he had a slow 40 time. I'm like, how can I take a guy under 200 pounds that runs a 5.45, 40? And I had Bucky originally as like my running back, like 3 or 4. And then I was like out on him after the combine. I blew that big time. I'm not going to make that mistake with Devin Neal. I still like Devin Neal. I know he ran 4.58 and a 4.61 in his 40. Here's the thing. I didn't think he was that fast anyway. I thought he would maybe run like a 4.54, to be honest with you. So 4.58 and 4.61 was a little disappointing, but I didn't think he would be in the 4.4s anyway. He's just not that type of player. But he's just good, solid football player in the right situation. I like Devin Neal a ton. He's going all over the place. I was getting him at the early 3rd round initially in drafts. Then he was moving all the way up to the very beginning of the 2nd. And then I've seen him mid round to end of the 2nd now, as some people are a little disappointed with the 40 times that they saw all these other guys run. It was one of the fastest running back groups ever. Yeah, as far as 40 times. So him running a 4.58 looked worse. And the same thing with Johnson running in the 4.5s. His looked worse just because so many guys ran in the 4.4s. But to me, I still think those guys are solid players. And again, we're not seeing guys bust out 60 and 80 yarders on a regular basis in the NFL. It just doesn't happen. So I'm not as worried about the super long speed with those guys.
Unless you're Saquon Barkley. But I was, the funny thing was I kept getting all these articles from some people about how they changed the turf at Lucas Oil Stadium and everybody's going to run so slow this year. And then it ended up being like one of the best years for running backs ever. So that was, it's just, it didn't make a difference at all. If anything, it seemed to help the players.
It seemed, I looked at a stat that showed the different years of everything, and it didn't seem like it was that big of a deal. There were guys that did slip a little bit here and there. But the guys that looked like they slipped, honestly, were guys that looked like they never were track guys. Right. So they looked more like they were uncomfortable coming out of the blocks as opposed to guys that aren't. So again, Fannin, slow 40 was not good, but also, he was a guy who didn't look like he was comfortable coming out of the blocks.
First 5 steps for him were absolutely terrible.
Yeah. And again, he's a guy that never puts his hand in the dirt. At Bowling Green, he was standing up in a wide receiver slot all the time. So he's used to coming out that way.
He wasn't standing straight up like Ash Genty does, but he was standing. Yes.
It's going to be interesting. I'm glad you brought that up. It's going to be interesting to see if someone in the league makes him adjust that.
Oh.
Because when I was in high school, like if we stood straight up like that, our coaches would have lost their mind, because a lot of times when you stand up straight like that, you end up stutter stepping with your first step goes back instead of forward. Mm-hmm. And you always want to be leaning going forward. So it's going to be interesting if a team kind of adjusts that with him a little bit. as a running back coach. I think we'll see a team not totally mess with him because they don't want to screw him up, but like I don't think you're going to see teams wanting to let him just stand straight up like he did at Boise State.
The difference between that is the same as like an offensive lineman when they got all their weight on their front hand or their, you got to stand straight up first and then get back down. So your waist, instead of just shooting straight out on a pass play or dropping back in a pass play, you have to get your balance first and then get into form. You're wasting the first one or two steps of your transition from your stance to your actual playing speed. So him standing straight up and having to get down and move. The same with I see the same thing with Amari and Hampton, where I see him like kind of he pops up in his first step before he does his first step, and that kind of drives me nuts a little bit too. A lot of these guys, yeah, they ran pretty well. There's a lot of like fundamental changes that need to be done in some of these guys. So, all right. Next one, in January's draft, Jalen Milroe went 207. Milroe was 303. I mean, he threw the ball out of bounds on a pass. He missed a couple players.
If you don't like AR, I'll tell you this: if you don't like Anthony Richardson, you're not gonna like Jalen Milroe, man. He's a smaller, not as fast version of AR with maybe even worse accuracy issues. Jalen Milroe, somebody's gonna love him. Somebody's gonna think he's a project that they can mold and fix. I'm not a Milroe guy, and this is, and I understand the juxtaposition of me saying I don't like Milroe, but I like AR. I just am out on him. Maybe a team goes crazy and goes up and gets him. He just feels like a project to me that someone's going to draft as a backup and hoping they can grow and build him. It'd be hard to see and think about justifying him starting in these first two seasons at all. So he's going to be one to be really interesting to see what the NFL, if someone falls in love with him and drafts him somewhere early in day 1 or 2.
Yes, 100%. And then
same thing with Ewers. Quinn Ewers. I'm not a Ewers guy. I know some people just absolutely love him and think that he's got a shot to be really good. He's not been a guy that I've been on. So he's got another one's going to be really interesting to kind of see where he goes. And while we're talking about quarterbacks, the role says he just can't justify Cam Ward at 1-3 personally. I tell you what, it's going to be really interesting to see where these QBs go in the draft and then what your team, your league mates think about them, because some of these guys, either people love Cam Ward or love Sanders, or they're out on him, and no matter where they go, they're probably not going to take him, to be honest with you. So it's and then there's going to be some people who love the landing spots and take a shot on them. This is definitely one of those years where it feels like in Superflex leagues, you're going to see quarterbacks drafted possibly in the top 10 that fall because people just don't like the player and they don't like the landing spot. And just because it's a quarterback, they're going to go a different direction. So it should be interesting.
I like Cam Ward, so I'm a big fan of Cam Ward. I think he might even go 101 overall. So Penix over A Rich, 100%. Yes, you are correct, sir. In January, 208 was Trey Harris. Trey Harris went 204 here. He moved up, did himself.
Trey Harris at 208 is mind-boggling. He would have never made it to that if I was in that draft. I love Trey Harris. I think Trey Harris for me is going to end up going the top of the second round. I saw Higgins. We see here, we talked about Higgins last night with Angelo Fantasy. Higgins at 2-1 here is, I think, where Trey Harris goes, to be honest with you. I think Trey Harris ends up being a spot ahead of Higgins, and Higgins right behind Harris. Though I like both players, I think Harris is a better version of Higgins. So I'm going there first, but I think both those guys end up being, depending on your league, I think they end up being early second round guys, possibly back into the first round if somebody needs a wideout. And it definitely, if you're in a 1 QB league, those guys are going to be, I think Harris is definitely a first rounder in a 1 QB league.
Well, I drafted Higgins first at 201 because I like Higgins better than Harris. So
yep, and you're going to have some people that are on both sides of that. I think both those guys, we talked about it last night with Angelo Fantasy. I think both those guys in the real NFL draft go top of the second round. Yeah. So I think they're going to be right next to each other. So I think here with them being 1 or 2 picks away from each other, I think makes sense.
Here's one of the biggest risers in the draft so far. Matthew Golden, 209 in the January draft and 111 now. Trey Harris, my wide receiver 3. Okay.
Yeah,
well,
Golden's going to be interesting, man. He ran that blazing 4.2940. He was a guy that was really good at Houston, transferred to Texas, expected a lot out of him, didn't do a lot, and then this year was pretty good, but not fantastic. He's a guy I feel like people are on because they really loved what they saw at the combine.
right.
I like Golden,
I don't love
but
him.
to me, I'm a Burden, Ubeka, Hunter, Trey Harris guy over Golden. I would take all those guys over Golden, and it's probably pretty close between Golden and Higgins for me. After that, like those would be my next two guys. I like Golden. I think he can be good. I'm just not going to overreact to the 4.2940. I look at production in college too, and he was solid in college, but he was actually better his freshman year at Houston. He had a better freshman year at Houston than he had any of the rest of his career.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, I got to look at that a little bit. I like Golden, but I'm not overreacting to the 4.29 and that immediately, even though, Harris ran a 4.54 and Higgins ran like a 4.47. I still like those guys better than Golden personally.
Higgins is my wide receiver 4, and then Harris, and then Golden. So,
and Golden's right there for me.
Yeah.
I'm probably taking those guys over Golden unless I just the landing spot. And if Golden somehow is the number 2 wide receiver off the board in the NFL draft, then maybe I'll do it. But I also, we've seen that before. Just because an NFL team takes a guy super early doesn't mean that guy's definitely better than other players. Because we've seen it with fast wide receivers in the past where guys go top 10 or 15 and it's a little bit of a shocker they go that high, and then those guys end up being busts. Darius Hayward Bay comes to mind.
The Raiders. All right, 210 in January is Dylan Sampson. Dylan Sampson was 211 here, so he didn't move very much. 211 was Jaden Royals. He dropped down all the way to 311, a whole round backwards for Jaden Royals. And
Jaden Royals is an interesting guy. He went to small school, Utah State. He was banged up this year, so he missed a lot of time, so not a lot of people got to see him.
Right.
He's a guy, I think, come closer to draft time, people are going to be a little more on him. He's just a guy that's not a well-known name right now. So I think when you're doing these mock drafts, he's not a guy that jumps out at people because he hasn't been talked about a lot. He went to a small school. He was injured. I just think that I think he's a really good player. He's definitely a guy I could see going all over the place.
Yeah.
Anywhere between the second and end of the third round, I could see Royals going. Again, especially if he gets a decent draft capital and a nice landing spot, I could see people all of a sudden being on him. So he's a guy I keep my eye on because I think he's just one of those guys that people don't know about. Yeah, and right here, the world says wide receiver 7 right now. But he's biased because he's from Utah. But sometimes that's the good part is you do see a lot of those guys that maybe other people don't. So I feel the same way about Luther Burden. I've just watched pretty much every game he's ever played at Missouri. And so I probably like him more than other people. And John Rule said Gordon going off the board at RB6 sounds just about perfect. I think you're right. I think he's a mid to late second round guy.
Right. Yeah.
And it just kind of depends. So Ollie Gordon helped himself with his weigh-in and his 40 time, especially at the Senior Bowl. Mm-hmm. I think he ran a better time than people thought, and he's big, but he's not as big as people thought. So I think that helps. Like, I think people were thinking he might be in the 240s, which these days you don't necessarily want a running back in the 240s because it's like you just feel like that guy ends up being a plotter, and he was closer to like the high 220s and ran a faster time. I think it was 228, but I could be wrong on that. I'm just doing that off the top of my head. But I think Gordon is a guy because you saw what he did as a junior, not this last year, but the year before. Oklahoma State was a mess this last year. So I'm just going to me, he's a guy like Luther Burden. You got to look at the year before because he was just phenomenal the year before when he won the Doak Walker's running back of the year. I think if he comes out last year, I think he's top 5 easily in that running back draft class and maybe closer to running back 2 or 3. To be honest with you. So him going back to school hurt him a little bit as far as just because this is a more of a loaded class, but that's not going to scare me off of Gordon. This is one of those years where usually you get outside your top 5, you're like going real iffy. Running backs, I love running backs up to 10, and I even like guys up to 15, RB 15. So I'm not going to be scared if he's the 7th, 8th, 9th guy off the board in fantasy drafts. That's not going to worry me.
The role, being from Utah, I've been to 43 states already. Utah is my favorite state so far. It's absolutely beautiful to drive through, beautiful to be in. It's there's not a bad place that I know in Utah. It's so beautiful in that state. So that's
just don't break down driving through the mountains in Utah. Did that one year. That was a nightmare. So don't do that. Redwood says, I like Royals tape, but it didn't feel like he played against legit competition. Utah State did not play a lot of good teams, to be honest with you. So it is going to be a little bit of a question mark on how that translates to the NFL. I mean, we've seen small school guys make it. I mean, geez, we were just talking about T.Y. Hilton at Florida International, who's a much better team now than when T.Y. actually played there. Florida International was not very good when he played there. He was that was one of the early days of that school being an actual D1 program. So we've seen guys make it, but it does always add a little bit of an asterisk to like, hey, can this guy translate to the next level?
Florida International Owls, right?
That's Florida Atlantic. Florida Atlantic Owls is where my sister and brother-in-law went. So that's Florida International's the Panthers. They are literally rivals. They're super close to each other down in South Florida. So they're real close to each other. But yeah, he actually went to the Devin Singletary went to Florida Atlantic, and Lejante Wester, who went to Colorado this year, wide receiver who I like late, is also a guy who went to Florida Atlantic before he transferred to Colorado.
All right, 212 in January was Tez Johnson. Tez Johnson was 312 in this draft, so Tez did not help himself.
Tez, we've shown that smaller guys can make it and be good. Tez is really small, though. I mean, he was listed at 170. He was 154. I mean, I weighed 150 my freshman year of high school, and I'm not a big guy, like, at all. I mean, that's not big. No. And again, his 40 time, people were expecting him to be blazing. Like, I think people thought he was going to be low 4.4s, and he wasn't. Right. So that I still think he can be a good pro player, but he's definitely a guy who the combine did not do him any favors, especially in a mock draft like this.
Right.
If he gets Tank Dell treatment though and goes like in the second round to somebody, all bets are off. People are going to be on him because they're going to be like, oh, he can be Tank Dell. He can be that good. I'm not worried about him being so small. But if he drops to like the fourth round in the NFL draft, now you got to worry.
Right. 3-1 was me picking both these drafts. It was Elijah Arroyo. He's my tight end 3. So he's going to be there in my drafts. I'm going to pick him there. So it is what it is. If I didn't pick Arroyo here in both of these drafts, where do you think he would have fell to?
Arroyo is going to be interesting because I know you like him a lot. He went tight end 3 off the board in this draft. I like Arroyo. He's a guy that's going to be interesting because he's been banged up. He's had injuries, but he's an elite athlete. I mean, we've talked about him on the pod before. The guy's just got elite athletic traits, great size, former, super high-end recruit out of Texas. So I think he's really good. I like Mason Taylor. As you saw, I took 3 picks later. I took Mason Taylor at 3-4. Yeah. I'm just on Mason Taylor. I just really, really like him. I thought he'd be the tight end 1 in next year's draft class. If he went back to school, I thought he would have been the clear-cut first-round pick in tight end 1. I'll interested to see where he goes in this draft. He looked really good at the combine. Looked really smooth, nice size. The thing is, he had a really nice career as a tight end. He was very consistent between 40 catches and 50 catches and 400 to 500 yards 3 straight years at LSU, even with a ton of other guys catching balls like Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. and Keyshawn Butte and some of those guys. I mean, he played with some really good guys and still put up solid numbers. And again, those numbers in college for a tight end are fantastic. If you're getting 40 to 50 catches and 400 to 500 yards in college, is great. The problem is, you matched them up with Fannin and Tyler Warren, who had 2 of the most successful careers in the history of college football as a tight end as far as statistics go. So a guy like Mason Taylor, who had a really, really good season, a really good career, kind of falls by the wayside when you match his 500 yards, these other guys 1,500 yards and 100 catches. It's just kind of hard to do that. But to me, I think he makes a really good pro. While I like Warren, it's so tough because I really like this tight end class. I think Warren and Loveland have shot to be fantastic tight ends, but I also think Taylor and Arroyo are not as far behind those 2 guys as some people think. I really think those guys as pros can be good. So for me personally, I love this spot, what you did and I did. I'd rather skip Warren and Loveland, take a running back or a wide receiver, and then take Arroyo or Taylor in the third round for value-wise.
Yeah.
For me.
January 3-2 was Cam Scadaboo. Cam Scadaboo went 210 in our latest draft, so he moved up about 5 spots or 4 spots here anyway. I like Scadaboo a lot. He's going to be a day 3 pick as far as I'm concerned. I like the guy, but I just don't see the.
It's going to be super interesting where he goes.
Yeah.
I mean, there's people who absolutely love him. I have people like, I mean, if you looked at PFF draft board, he was like the number 2 running back on their draft board originally, like a month or 2 ago. Like if you looked him at the rankings wise.
Oh, wait a minute. We talking PFF, Jaden Higgins, number 1 receiver.
I know. PFF. So again, so that's what I'm saying. So like there's gonna be people that absolutely love Scadabo. There's gonna be people who are gonna take him. I know I have friends who are like, man, we take Scadabo in the second round. I'm like, whoa, I don't know about that, man. But you never know what these NFL teams can do. There's going to be a team that falls in love with them and loves them. I mean, if you get Scadaboo going to the Chargers, like, Roll, I was just going to say this. Great call. Great mind thing. Like, Roll says, I fell in love with Arroyo. I think he's going to go 55 to the Chargers, and he's instantly going to take over. I see if he goes 55 to the Chargers, I think Arroyo has to go in the second round of tight end premium drafts.
Absolutely.
I think because that's a great landing spot. I was just going to say Scadabo going to the Chargers also would be another good landing spot. So if he went in like the third round of the Chargers, I think he flies up draft boards because people love that landing spot. And if he's going in the top 3 rounds, people are like, oh, they really like him and they're going to pound the rock. Love it. Now he goes to a team that has a clear-cut starter and goes in like the 4th or 5th round. Now you're going to have a little bit more question on that. Will jumps in here and says Scadabo is going to be a bust. I'm guessing he won't run the 40 as Brody either. Yeah, he's giving me Braylon Allen vibes in that he knows his 40 is going to be slow, and so he doesn't want to have it out there because Braylon Allen was kind of the same. But John, you love Braylon Allen, and we saw he was pretty productive when he got a shot with the Jets this year.
Right.
But again, if Scadabo ends up being like a late 4th round pick like Braylon Allen was, ends up going to a team where, he's on – there's a clear-cut running back ahead of him, then I think it's trouble. So, like, here's an example. Say the Colts take him to back up JT, and they take him in, like, the 4th or 5th round. See, we're going to like him, but he's going to go in the 3rd or 4th round of fantasy drafts. Like, he's going to be the backup to JT. Like,
you talking Scadaboo?
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great because he's a great receiving back. Yeah,
it's a nice landing spot, but he's going to be stuck behind JT, so it's going to hurt his value. Like real life, I love that.
Yes,
but it's going to hurt his value fantasy wise in that you're going, hey, the only way he's going to get a decent amount of touches is if JT's hurt. So I think that's where you get that a little bit. Will Bauer says the Toby Gerhart comps. I think there's some of those in there. I laughed the other day. Someone like rattled off like every starting white running back in the NFL for the last like 2 decades and was like comping him to all of them, which is, obviously a funny joke. I did think it was funny. Actually, I want to say this, the role put out. He says, I've got Dart as my QB2 in this class behind Sanders and ahead of Ward. He says, is that too bold? John, I know your Ward is QB1. So that is probably too bold for you, right?
Ward's my QB1, but Dart is probably my QB2, to be honest with you right now. It's such a – I mean, I'm not a Sanders fan. I know you are, JT. I know you're a huge Sanders fan. It is what it is. And then, I don't like Ewers or, Gabriel or Will Howard or Milrow. These guys, I would have to say that my Jackson Dart is probably my QB2 in this class.
I like Dart. I'm a Sanders guy, so Sanders is my QB1. Ward is still my QB2, but Dart is right there as my QB3. I like Dart this season a ton. I think, depending on the draft capital, I like Dart. I think he's got a good upside. Obviously, everybody talks about that Ole Miss system where it's like a quick read and throw, and whether he can actually progress in the NFL is going to be interesting. I like Sanders. Again, we know this. I've talked about him nonstop for the last 2 years, I feel like. But Sanders is my QB1. I like Ward at 2, and I think Dart's right there in that mix. I definitely don't think there's a huge drop-off before he gets to Dart, but I do think it's those 3 guys, and then everybody else is way down the list for me. Yeah, I've got Kyle McCord at QB4 for me, and I like Kyle McCord way more than probably anyone other than his mother and his dad. I think Kyle McCord's really good, but for me, Kyle McCord would be like would be an awesome like third, fourth round pick for a team that has a decent starter or an older player where he can kind of learn behind him. I think McCord could be a really, really solid NFL starter. But to me, there's a pretty decent gap between those guys that could all go first round and McCord, who I think is probably more of a third, fourth round quarterback. If he goes in the fourth, I think it's going to be an absolute steal for a team. I think third is probably better, but I also like him way more than I like Ewers, Howard, Milroe, Leonard, Gabriel, any of those other guys. But I know I'm kind of out on a limb. I know there's very few guys that have him top 4 like I do.
I know a lot of people have Riley Leonard as their quarterback 1. I have to control my emotions on that one and say no, even though he's a Notre Dame boy. I can't really. I'm just kidding. Nobody has Riley Leonard as quarterback 1, but I like Riley Leonard as a college quarterback. I love what he did at Notre Dame, but I don't think it translates very well to the NFL. So
I think he can end up making a team as like a practice squad QB and then possibly working his way as maybe a backup QB in the NFL. I just don't see a path to him being a starter in the NFL, at least right now. Those things could change. I definitely like him more than a lot of the backups that are in the NFL right now. So I think he could be in that range. The same thing with McCord. I think McCord could easily have a long career as an NFL backup, but he also is a guy I think has the tools to, in the right situation, build and actually be a starter in the NFL at some point. I've kind of likened him a little bit to Kirk Cousins. I think McCord is kind of a Kirk Cousins type of player. That's why I say if a team could get him in the third and he doesn't have to come in and be the starter, but can come in and just compete and play, I like that situation for him.
I like a lot of these guys as because the NFL now has an emergency third quarterback on the sidelines all the time. A lot of these guys are going to get jobs as the emergency quarterback, practice squad guy, and that's not a bad place to be because that's how you get opportunities and that's when things just happen. That's how guys get starting jobs sometimes because they're bam, they're on the right place, right time. They get in the game, and then you get your opportunity that way. So, 3-3 Isaiah Bond, he moved up to 2-7 in after a month. So, what did Isaiah Bond do to improve his draft stock that much?
Isaiah Bond's fast. Of course, he said he thought he could break Xavier Worthy's record. Didn't come close to breaking the record. He said he was going to be like in the low 4.2s. I think he ended up
4.43 or 4.44, 4.45 or something like that. Yeah.
No, he was was in the 4.3s, right?
I thought he was 4.44, so 4.45 or something like that. He was really.
I'm gonna have to look that up. I think that's too high. I think he was lower than that. People like him because he's fast and something. I have to tell you what, I'm not a Bond guy.
Not a Bond fan either.
He just was banged up at Texas a lot. He's a guy that's got all the skills, but it's just like, is he ever going to completely put it together, especially for fantasy? Now, I think he could be a decent player on an NFL team for you. A guy can stretch the field, do some different stuff, but he's a guy I'm not sure ever becomes a wide receiver 2, even in the NFL for fantasy wise. So
right.
I just not a big Bond guy. I'm gonna sit back and let somebody else take him, to be honest with you.
100%. 3-4 in January was Damian Martinez. Damian Martinez was 4-2 in our latest draft. I like Damian Martinez, but I'm not going to reach for him, so I'll let him fall. If somebody takes him at 3-4, have at it. Go get your guy.
I like Damian Martinez. His situation where he lands and gets drafted is going to be very interesting. I liked him a lot. He didn't get a ton of carries, like a full-time workload at Miami, but he was good. So I like Martinez. He's a guy I've been kind of let fall to me. So if I haven't, and especially in the third round, if I didn't get like Mason Taylor, a lot of times I've been trying to get, I like Martinez. I've been taking Martinez like mid to late third round. So here I think getting him at 4.2, I think is really nice value.
Yeah, in this draft for sure. Number at 3-5 in January was Evan Stewart. Evan Stewart is where in this draft he didn't even get drafted.
Well, Evan Stewart was a mess up. I think somebody took him. He actually went back to Oregon. So he's on the sleeper list, but he went back to school. He right now is probably before the season starts, he's one of my top receivers for next year's draft. 4.4 for Isaiah Bond. He ran a 4.41 and a 4.4 flat.
I thought it was 4.45, but yeah.
And they redid it and said he ran a 4.39. So I was right in that mix. I knew I was somewhere in there, but he's 5'11", 180. He's running a 4.39. Like I said, he's a guy who just, you expected so much out of him at college at Alabama and in Texas. And he had his moments where, man, he absolutely shined at both places. But then there's a lot of times he just disappeared.
Right.
And that scares me.
January, Jaden Higgins was 3.6. He went 2.1 in our latest draft. So that's a big jump.
You like
there.
Higgins, he went a big up. And he's a guy I've been talking about a little bit like Royals, but I think more Higgins is people now are going to see Higgins, a guy that probably a lot of people didn't see last year. I think he's going to move way up in drafts. I think he's going to get drafted in the early second of the NFL draft, and that's going to push him up to early second in fantasy drafts as well. He's just a guy that people don't know about that are gonna start hearing about him.
If I could reshuffle this draft, probably next month what's going to happen here is if I'm 201, which I will be because I'll start this draft and take the one spot because I don't want to show my hand to the people I'm drafting with. So I'm going to probably take Jackson Dart at the 201, and then if Higgins falls to 3.1, I'll probably do that there. But I'm not sure how that's going to play out.
I think Jackson Dart, depending on where he gets drafted and what kind of league you're in, if someone's kind of desperate and needing another QB, I think Dart ends up going the very end of the first round to beginning of the second round. Yeah, in a lot of fantasy. He's going to move up. Again, we're doing mocks right now. We just don't quite know where Dart's going to go. Is he going to be a first rounder? Is he going to be an early second, or does he drop? If he goes first round, I think you're going to see him at the end of the first in fantasy drafts, or at the latest, 2-1, 2-2 in drafts. But right now, you just don't 100% know where he's going. So I kind of feel like there's a little that buffer in there right now.
He threw such a pretty ball at the combine. I watched it there, and then we came home and I watched it on TV, and I was like, man, this is so. He threw the ball very nice. So
yeah. Roll jumps and says, I might already want 2027 picks for Ryan Williams. That's not a joke. Ryan Williams at Alabama is an absolute stud. So is Jeremiah Smith from Ohio State. Those are two guys that I think would be the top two wideouts off the board next year, but they're both not eligible as they're only true sophomores this season. So in 2027 draft, I think you're going to want early picks, and you're going to want to go for Ryan Williams and Jeremiah Smith from Alabama and Ohio State. Those guys are absolute studs there. If you're in C2C or Debbie or CFF leagues, those guys are absolutely going at the top of every draft. They're in the top 5.
I have a gentleman named Ryan Williams in one of my fantasy leagues, and I know I'm going to do everything I possibly can to get that pick 101 and just hold it over his head and get everything I possibly can. He works for one of the betting sites, and it would be great to get that 101 and be able to, because we know Ryan Williams is going to be a really, really, really high pick come that draft. So probably the top 3 anyway. So where are we at here? Jordan James, 3.7, 3.6.
Estrepo. Xavier Estrepo is in there from Miami. He's an interesting guy. Depending on where he goes, he's one of the clear-cut slot guys in this draft. Mm-hmm. So if teams miss out on the top-end slot guys like Burden and Ibuka, I think Estrepo could be the next guy. So it'll be really interesting where he goes in the draft, because if he ends up getting second-round draft capital in the NFL draft, I think he's a guy that goes earlier than this in fantasy drafts.
Yeah, Estrepo went 4.6 in this January draft, so he moved up a whole round, deservedly so. I think people, I'm not sure why he fell so bad so far in the January draft anyway, but that's January. I mean, what do you expect?
Yeah,
and then that's it. I'll just run through the rest of these. Let's see here. In January, it was Jordan James and Dylan Gabriel, Mason Taylor, Alec. I don't know why I can't say
Amenyore. Yeah, I know he's up in the second round on this. He's a big guy that's people really liked him, and then he played for a bad Stanford team this year, so it's going to be interesting to see. He went in the second round in the second draft. He went in at 209, and he was in the third before. He's going to be an interesting guy to see where NFL scouts like him or not. I've seen people that absolutely love him and have him in their top 5, and then I have people that are completely out on him, and he's like 10th in their wide receiver list. So he's going to be an interesting guy as well to see kind of where he falls. And then you got the 2 running backs right after that, 2 guys that really, with their 40 times, showed out at the combine. Tootin and Harvey are 2 guys I think that are going to be possibly moving up people's lists.
Yeah, Harvey was. I got an interview with RJ Harvey, so that was pretty nice. It was pretty cool. Ao Minor is on a pronunciation guide is how to say that, but Brashard Smith, Riley Leonard, and then in fourth round, RJ Harvey, Rondé Gadsden, your boy, Gunnar Helm, who didn't do very well at the combine, but then we found out he almost broke his foot.
Really bad ankle injury, and he tried to fight his way through, because it was surprising when we were watching him. I was like, man, I thought he was a lot better than this, and he looked bad, and he ran one of the worst 40 times ever. So I think he's a guy, if he can get healthy for his pro day and maybe rerun, I think, he played way faster than he was. The issue for him, especially on his RAS score, was he was I think he was the lightest tight end there at 241. So he was a little bit smaller of a guy. I think Helm is the combine hurt him, but I think teams are going to look at that and say, hey, he wasn't 100%. Let's take another look at him, because there's a lot of people that have him in their top 5 at tight end.
I tell you who hurt themselves by staying in the draft one more year was Donovan Edwards, who was at 4-4 in this draft. Man, he was, I think he should have came out last year when it was not such a good running back class, and maybe he would have shined a little bit, but he really did not do himself any favors by staying in for another year.
It's going to be interesting with Donovan because he's a guy that everybody really liked Devy-wise for a lot of years. He's just got a really good receiving profile, but we've seen he's just not good at finding lanes and picking lanes and he just wasn't good at Michigan for that. I mean, he never was the clear-cut running back there. So I think he's a guy that can make his way in the NFL and be a better NFL player, because he does have a good receiving profile. I just don't know if he's ever going to be a high-end fantasy guy, because I just don't think you're going to be able to count on him being in the game a lot.
Yeah. Then Antonio Williams, Barry Brown, these are the picks in January. Curtis Rourke, Jaden Blue. Jaden Blue did himself some favors at the draft. He ran pretty well. Savion Williams, I compare him like Jalen Camp, the guys like that, just workout warrior. He may just be more of a physical specimen than an actual wide receiver, but he actually looked pretty good when you watch his all 22s. He actually does pretty good receiving the ball. I like his hands. I like the way his arms are away from his body when he makes his catches. He's pretty good as far as that. I like Savion Williams. Not that I think he's going to ever be a wide receiver 1 for a team, but he could fill in as a wide receiver 3 for some teams, I think. Mitchell Evans at 412, Jack Beck at 501. So where did Jack Beck go in this draft?
So that's a here, you got Beck in the 4th round, 410. Yeah. I think he's going to move up. I think
he'll be mid-third, yeah.
I think he's going to be a guy who ends up probably being in the 3rd. It's going to be interesting with these running backs. There are so many. DJ Giddens looked real good at the combine, and I tell you what, he's a lot bigger and faster than I thought he was.
Yes.
He had much better size and better speed than I thought. Travis Etienne, he was a little bit on the small side. He was one of the few guys that wasn't over 200 pounds, but ran a nice 40. So he's going to be kind of an interesting guy in that mix. I loved my pick here at 4-4. I got Jalen Knoll from Iowa State. He's the slot wide receiver to go with Higgins. I don't think he ended up with a blazing 40 time. He was under 4.4. He's in the 4.3s. Slot wide receiver. I think he's a guy that's going to go way up. I don't think there's any. I've got him in a couple drafts now in the 4th round. I don't think there's any way he gets to the 4th when it's all said and done. I think he goes higher in the NFL draft. I think there's a chance he gets drafted above Restrepo and he ends up being a late 2nd, early 3rd in fantasy drafts, because I think Jalen Knoll is highly underrated right now.
Woody Marks went from 5'2" to 5'1". I'm surprised he didn't move up a little bit more after the draft, after the combine also.
Woody Marks is another guy, didn't run a great 40. He was another one of those guys in the kind of mid to high 5.4s. 4.5s. I misspoke there. He was in the 4.5s. So they didn't love him. I like his receiving profile. He was a beast at Mississippi State. He's another guy that is very Bucky Irving-esque to me.
Mm-hmm.
If you get him in the right situation, he's a guy that's just a baller, went to Mississippi State, then transferred to USC. I just think he's a player. I really like Woody Marks. I'm loving that he's dropping in drafts, because honestly, if I was thinking about taking Marks at 4.4, and I saw Jalen Knoll there. I just had to pull the trigger on him. But Marks, he's a guy I like. And if I miss running back early in the draft, I end up with a bunch of wide receivers and tight ends. He's a guy I'm going to be probably targeting a little bit later.
Nick Nash went 5'10". He moved up to 5'5". Ricky White got drafted 5'8", but he was not drafted in this draft. I don't see him anywhere on here. No, Ricky White was not drafted. I like Ricky White. We did a profile on him already. He's a pretty good receiver, solid receiver, probably wide receiver 3 on some team, but a little underrated.
I like Ricky White. He's got great special teams profile.
Yeah.
If you got him in the right situation, I think he can be a good pro. He's another one. He didn't run a very good 40 time, so that one hurt him. That's why I think he probably didn't get drafted here. His 40 time was not great, but I think he's a really good player, and his production was ridiculous at UNLV, even with bad quarterback play. He still was able to produce, so I like that a lot. One of my guys here, Daniel Dixon, earlier in the show says Pat Bryant in the 5th, great value. One of those guys I can see move up in ADP come April. Daniel, I totally agree with you. Pat Bryant, I think, is highly underrated. Really good at Illinois, even when they didn't have very good quarterback play. Luke Altmaier really kind of stepped up this last year. Pat Bryant had a really, really good year in a tough Big Tens, excuse me. He had just a really good season. Pat Bryant, I got a little soft spot in my heart for him as a U of I guy. I live 10 minutes away from the stadium. I think he's going to move up. And there's a good chance he gets a nice landing spot. I think he ends up going in the 4th in most rookie drafts, and possibly he sneaks his way into the 3rd.
Yeah. Well, I think we did pretty good justice on this draft. We spent a little too long, about 45 minutes talking about the Colts in the middle of the episode, the beginning of the episode. We could have had 2 separate episodes, but this was a nice exercise. I'm looking forward to doing this again in a month and seeing where guys, and especially a month after that, after the NFL draft, and kind of seeing like where guys move at, when that's concerned. But JT, we're going to our show in about 2 hours. We are going to, let me get out of the full screen here.
Talking about Tyler Warren, right? We
are going to talk about Tyler Warren. Yes, tight end. So that will be in Seth Wilcock with Tyler Warren from Penn State. So we'll have a show here at 3:00 Central Time, 4:00 Eastern Time. So about an hour from now, hour and 15 minutes from now. So get your popcorn ready, go to the bathroom, all that kind of stuff, do your laundry, and then we'll see you here in about an hour and a half. All right. So
sounds good.
See you later, boys.
Thanks, guys.